I've been a deacon and priest and bishop now for 40 some odd years. I have spent most of those years preaching on Trinity Sunday, trying to explain the doctrine of the Trinity, and I'm announcing that this year I'm giving up. It's rather, trying to explain the doctrine of the Trinity is rather like trying to put leotards on an octopus. It just doesn't work. So instead of trying to explain it, I thought today I would take you on a tour of the Trinity to see if we can uncover some of the interior life that the doctrine of the Trinity tries to reveal about God. Well, specifically, what I propose to do is we're going to start with a short excursion into Russian iconography. And then we'll have a brief encounter with New Testament Greek. We'll pause for a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers moment. And then we'll sit for a moment with Bishop Basil the Great of Caesarea, a 4th century bishop, and see what we uncover. Okay, here we go. First, an excursion into Russian iconography. If you've ever been to Moscow and to the Tretyakov Gallery, has anybody ever been to the Tretyakov Gallery? You know that you go through this gallery which is filled with the greatest treasures of Russian iconography that are through the centuries. And in the center of the gallery, in a room by itself, on an easel, is a large icon depicting the Trinity. And the icon, it's a picture of 3 young men sitting around a little table with a loaf of bread on the table. It's by Rublev, the greatest iconographer of all. It's a pretty icon. It's beautiful, but it doesn't go anywhere because this is not an icon for the casual observer. You have to live with the icon for a few minutes. You have to move into the icon and let it move into you. And after you do for a little while, what happens is, I don't know how this happens, but it does. It's a trick of perspective or pain. I don't know what it is, but suddenly you find yourself in the icon. It's not just an icon anymore of 3 young men sitting around a table. It's about 4 people sitting at the table. You're the 4th. What the icon does is it invites the viewer, if they're patient, into the life, the inner life of the Trinity. The point of the icon is not a description of God. That's where we go off the rails with the Trinity when we think about the Trinity as a doctrine of who God is and what God is like, and 3 people sitting around a table and an old man, and it gets all confusing because that's not what it's about. The doctrine of the Trinity isn't about who God is, but how God reveals God's self in human life, in your life, and in my life. It's a way of saying, you can join this life, God's life. The Trinity says, you matter. You matter. Look here, you're sitting at the table with God. You matter. Creation matters. You are worthy of God's love. All creation is worthy of God's love. No matter who you are, you're worthy. That's what the life of the Trinity is all about, is proclaiming all of us, everybody here, as worthy of God's love. The Trinity is all about It's all about invitation and inclusion into God's life. Now, for a brief Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers moment. Oh, and thrown in just for fun, a brief New Testament Greek lesson. First, the Greek. Greek is a great language. I wish we spoke Greek. It's so precise, it's so clear, it's so orderly. In Greek, there's 7 words for love, different kinds of love. Not in English, we only have that one tired, old, misused, overused word of love. You love I love the flower. I love you. I love the candlelight. Whatever. It's tired. It's overworked. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Greek has 7 very distinct words to describe different kinds of love. There's one exquisite word that describes the interior life of the communion that we call God. And the word is, are you ready? Perichoresis. All right. Peri, P-E-R-I, means around. Choresis is the root word of choreography. So, to describe the life of the Trinity, the Greeks talk about the perichoresis, the dancing around of the inner life of God, the movement around. It's a continuous and fluid and beautiful and graceful movement within God. Think of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire whirling about the dance floor in a loving embrace, enjoying the moment, loving one another, loving and exulting in their ability to dance and swing and be joyful. That's what perichoresis is. Think about God dancing around in continual, fluid and beautiful and graceful movement. Dancing is all about celebration. Perichoresis is all about divine celebration. The Trinity is all about celebration, and you and I and everyone who ever has been, who will be, and all creation is invited to be embraced by the divine love and to dance together in loving embrace for eternity. We're invited by God to take a whirl around the dance floor, the ballroom that we call creation. Well, now, the doctrine of the Trinity did not spring from nowhere. It did not arrive like Botticelli's Venus, full-grown out of the ocean, standing on a clamshell. The doctrine of the Trinity evolved amid the conflict and the controversies of the first 4 centuries of the early church, and they were vicious. A very tense and conflicted era, something like our own time, I guess. The life of the church has never been free of conflict and will never be until the life of the Trinity overtakes creation and fulfills it and invites us into the perfection and the joy of God on the last day. Back to the 4th century, there was a bishop named Basil. Basil the Great, he's called sometimes. He was bishop in Caesarea, which is on the coast of Palestine, not terribly far from Jerusalem. Basil was thick into the controversy about who and what the Trinity is. Oh, Lord. He was deep into it. The doctrine of the Trinity to us is rather ho-hum today. We'll say it in just a few minutes in the Nicene Creed, which is a product of the 4th century. It's ho-hum because it's been settled in the life of the church, not because it's not important. In the making of the doctrine of the Trinity, people were murdered, tortured, beaten, imprisoned, spat upon, all in working out this doctrine. We are a murderous and hostile group to one another. But it got worked out. Not because of us, but in spite of us. Well, Bishop Basil took a very different tack. He described the Trinity in pastoral terms. Basil described the Trinity in pastoral terms as an expression of God's care, as an expression of God's love for all people, and for Christians' responsibility to care for others in the same way that God cares for us. The good bishop put it something like this: we are all blessed by God's lavish abundance. Our challenge as followers of Jesus is to ensure that all God's children receive their fair share of God's abundance, be it food or shelter or clothing or medical care. Bishop Basil says, look, if you got 2 pairs of shoes, you got 1 pair too many. The second pair belongs to the person who doesn't have any shoes. If you've got 3 overcoats, then 2 belong to the poor person who doesn't have an overcoat, and 1 belongs to you. Do you see where he's going with this? In other words, we are all intimately connected and are responsible for one another as part of being a Christian, just like being invited to be a part of Rublev's icon or dancing with Fred and Ginger whirling around the ballroom. The Trinity has an answer to Cain's question in the Old Testament, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer is no. We are not our brother's keeper, but we are our brother's brother and our sister's brother. The Trinity, it's not a doctrine about God. It's a doctrine of how God reveals oneself, and you and I are part of that revelation in the world and in life. How God reveals God's self to us as a loving Father, as a creator, as a redeeming, sacrificing Son, as a sustaining, living, ongoing presence in life. And not surprisingly, you and I are called to reveal God's love, the Trinity's love, in 3 ways. First, in generosity of spirit and sharing of our goods. Secondly, we're called to reveal God's life in service and sacrifice for and on behalf of fellow human beings. And thirdly, we're called to reveal God's love in faithful and continuing witness in word and deed to the joy of fulfillment of what it means to follow Jesus, or at least try to follow in Jesus' footsteps. And in doing so, to join the Trinity around the feast prepared for God from the foundation of the universe. Happy Trinity Sunday.